when I have a camera in my hands, I don't really experience the world the same way. Stabilizator have problem, and I stop to try and fix, and other soldier grab me and pull me into trench because he say they're sniper. Here, you have to run. You can't stop running. I know, we're going to stay in Ukraine. We're definitely going to stay in Ukraine, my wife and I. Yeah. As she says, when there's peace, party, party, party.
Christopher, I should say welcome to Ukraine, but you are staying in Ukraine for almost 3 years, yeah? Very interesting story of you. I would like our people to know more about your case, about such people as you who, during the most difficult times in our country, the most risky times ever, the most difficult situation in whole Europe is happening in Ukraine, and you are staying here. What made you decide to come to Ukraine?
There are so many problems in the world. I was living in New York for 27 years. You walked in the street, you see homeless people, you hear about domestic abuse. There's wars going on everywhere. You know, if you see a problem somewhere and you think that somehow you can do something to help with that problem, I think every one of us should do it. You know, it could be a matter of giving $5 to somebody on the street, or traveling across an ocean to come to a war zone and make a movie. But I think that the only way that the world improves, the only way that this becomes a better society is for each one of us who can do something to do something whenever we see the opportunity.
Did you visit Ukraine before the war started?
No, I didn't. I had an apartment in Romania because I was working a lot in Bucharest, and as a cinematographer. And when the invasion happened, I went and stayed at my friend's house outside of Bucharest, and I gave my apartment to a mother and her kid from Odessa, who came and lived in my house.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, of course. For 2 months. And I didn't really know much about Ukraine or the relationship, the history between Ukraine and Russia beyond a basic knowledge. And I started going over to my apartment to like bring groceries and stuff to this family. And I would sit and have borscht with them, and the daughter spoke good English. And so that's really how I began to learn about Ukraine. And then I was back in Brooklyn, back in New York for work. And I was sitting in a bar one night with a friend of mine who's a producer from Berlin. And we were talking about how the war had only been going on for a few months, and already in America, people had stopped talking about it. Like, it used to be on the front page of the New York Times, and now it's only page 5 or 6. And we were drinking some whiskey that night, and I got home at maybe 3 in the morning, and as I was falling asleep, I looked at plane tickets on my phone, and I found a ticket for the next day to Warsaw, and I just booked it. And 48 hours later, I was in Kyiv, and that was almost 3 years ago.
If you would be sober, would you do this?
Yeah, I probably would have done it anyway, but I might have planned it more carefully, because I really just showed up in Kyiv, and I was like, okay, what type of media can I make that will have a political influence? And given that no one in America was talking about the war after only a few months, I thought, okay, well, like something that's hard news, hard doc, is only going to reach people like you and me. It's not going to reach the people who are more politically apathetic. I wanted to reach those people. So that's why that first film that I made, Comedy of War, was about stand-up comedy, because I thought, oh, somebody just surfing through Netflix or Amazon's where the film ended up. Anybody who's just surfing through TV channels, if they see something that's about stand-up comedy, even if they don't give a shit about Ukraine, they might stop and watch it. And then if they fall in love with those characters, they'll fall in love with Ukraine, and then they'll care about the war.
Have you been ever disappointed because of this reason to come to Ukraine during this time, during these 3 years?
I'm disappointed when I go back to America. Like, Americans don't see past their front lawns with their barbecues and their pickup trucks, you know? They don't realize that out in the rest of the world, there are people who are just like us who are having problems. And it could be so easy if we would focus as an American society on helping people. We could help so many people, but most Americans don't care. And so pretty much every time I go back to America, I'm disappointed and my heart really hurts because I see America as this place that's just morally bankrupt.
I do remember your first visit to the front line.
Yeah.
How did you feel yourself, and how did you find this strength in yourself to go to such a place where nobody knows whether you will come back or not?
I didn't really think about the danger at all because I had become obsessed with making this film about ordinary people having to fight a war. That's the film that my wife and I are making right now. We've been making it for 2 years. Mm-hmm. And so when I first got the chance to go with the 127th to the front line in Kharkiv Oblast, I was just so focused on what I was going to film and how I was going to film it. I mean, I almost got killed within 5 minutes of being there because I didn't realize that the area we were walking through had duja min, and I was with stabilizator filming soldiers running, and I'm running backwards, and one of them grabs me and is like, phew. And then different time, because I almost stepped on min, and then different time, same day, maybe 2 hours later, we're moving from one position to other position, and stabilizator have problem, and I stop to try and fix, and other soldier grab me and pull me into trench because he say, they're sniper here, you have to run, you can't stop running. And I was such inexperienced when it came to anything like that. So I'd never been in a place where there was a
real danger.
A real danger, yeah. And then the second time I went to the front line, I went for an extended period of time. And at that point, I had kind of become friends with these guys in this one rota. And they took me to position with them and in Luhansk. And
Luhansk region.
Yeah, yeah. And we stayed there for a few days, for 3 days. And there it didn't really feel, I mean, like there was artillery landing around us, but like it didn't really feel that dangerous because back then there weren't so many FPV drones. And it was springtime and there were leaves over us, so we had cover. And when there was artillery coming in close, we had a dugout, shelter. We could go underground, and it didn't really seem that bad. And then like maybe 2 months after I was at that position, one of my friends who I was with, who was at that position, he got a piece of shrapnel in the head. And we were always going out to like launch the drone, pick up the drone, fix the antenna. And the artillery always seemed to land like at least 100 meters away, far enough that like you had to take cover, but you're probably going to be okay as long as you take cover. And that, when my friend Diesel got injured, he's alive, but he's super fucked up. When he got injured, that really impressed upon me. Whoa, we were in a very, very dangerous place. And then one of my closest friends who I was at position with a few times, he was killed back in October, just doing the same thing that we were doing last time I was with him at position. He's flying a drone. He was, left to go from one position to another, and an FPV drone got him. And so when stuff like that happens, that wall kind of comes down, and I realized that I'm actually living in this world and not just filming it. It's a strange feeling.
What your film is about? What are the stories? What is the idea? Now, do you understand how it will look like?
The Home Front is a feature film that it is about ordinary people who were forced to fight a war, but it's really about human relationships, and it's very much about love. It's about love between a father and his children. It's about love between a husband and wife. It's about love between friends. That is a theme that just happened. It just came out. I've just been documenting for 2 years, and that is the most prevalent thing that I I found it's the movie's about love. And one of the reasons that I feel so at home here and that I live in Ukraine, and my wife and I, if we ever have kids, we'll have kids here in Ukraine, is because the people here have so much empathy, and in fact, there is so much love in this place.
What impressed you the most during your staying in Ukraine, talking, having conversations with our military heroes? What were the most impressive things which you see by yourself?
People in Ukraine have such an inherent sense of community and social responsibility to that community. And people here in Ukraine are very kind. In America, people might be polite, but they're not kind. At the end of the day, they mostly have their own interests at heart. My experience of Ukraine is that people here really have the interests of their fellow Ukrainians and fellow human beings at heart. I was broken down in Kharkiv Oblast near Izum a couple of years ago, and some guy stopped to help me, and he spent 2 hours working on my Volkswagen bus. There was another vehicle about 1 kilometer away that had hit a mine, and it was in pieces. It blew up, and we went in his car to that vehicle and found a part that we needed for the bus. He put it on the bus, and I tried to give him some money, but he wouldn't take any money. World where people are so motivated by possessions and money and greed and power. There's a purity here that that is very rare and special. A purity of heart.
How do you think whether the support of Ukraine and Ukrainians is strong enough nowadays?
What's happening in America right now is dangerous because Donald Trump is framing support for Ukraine as a sort of transactional thing. I believe that democracy, since the time of the ancient Greeks, has been this very special ideal. Democratic societies, when they work well, they don't tend to go to war with each other. They tend to have good domestic economies. You look at Denmark, Norway, Germany, the UK, France, Canada. People in those societies tend to have great social mobility. There's good availability of consumer credit. So if you're just a morally responsible person, you would probably want to help your neighbor live as well as you. And in this case, as a global power, America's neighbor in this example is Ukraine. And so you'd think it would just be natural for America to want to help Ukraine become a strong, thriving, solid democracy. Right now, Ukraine's a young democracy, and it's very fragile, that democracy. And so I believe it's just our moral responsibility to help. And the current administration in America doesn't see things that way. They see it as a transaction, as a deal to be made, not as a moral responsibility. But on a practical level, Ukraine's military industrial capacity has increased very significantly in the last year. Ukraine's army, in terms of manpower, is now the largest army in Europe, right? We have now the largest army in Europe. So the answer to your question is a complicated one, but I think that there's tremendous cause for concern, but I believe that Ukraine and Europe are on a path to being able to defend against Russian aggression independent from support from the United States.
Mhm. We are staying now in Dnipro, and the front line moves further and further closer to Dnipropetrovsk region. The question is very simple. Do you believe that Ukraine has the power to stop the movement of Russian militaries, and whether you believe in our victory or you have doubts in this?
Well, it depends on how we define victory. I don't believe that it is tactically possible for the Russians to reach the Dnipro River anytime in the foreseeable future. We have defensive positions and fortifications all across that steppe now. If Russia were to try to cross that, my God, man, it would be a meat assault that would last for a year. It would cost Russia maybe hundreds of thousands of lives. And I just don't know if even the Putin regime could bear those kinds of losses. And then imagine they get to the gates of Dnipro. Well, it's not like Dnipro is going to fall overnight. Think about how long it took for them to overrun Bakhmut.
Mm-hmm.
And Bakhmut is, what, 1/15 the size of Dnipro? Russia has this resume boogeyman type specter right now with a shadow cast across all of Eastern Europe. But in reality, as Senator John McCain used to say, Russia's a gas station. That's just about it, with nukes. Russia is a benzene station with nukes.
Yeah. Listen.
Yeah.
Personal question. What do you think? What is your plan for the peaceful time for Ukraine? Whether you are going to stay in Ukraine or you will move to other countries?
We're going to stay in Ukraine. We're definitely going to stay in Ukraine, my wife and I. Yeah. As she says, when there's peace, party, party, party. I can't wait for the bars and for the clubs to be open again, for the bars to be open all night. It's going to be great. It's going to be great, man. Mm-hmm. I can't wait till there's peace.
Yeah. It will be very strange for us after such a long period of time to feel everything normal.
Yeah. When there are music festivals, go to a music festival in the Carpathians, that's going to be great.
Yeah.
It's going to be fantastic.
Yeah. Can we speak about your skills, about your profession, about what you are doing, like a director, like a photographer? Tell your story, how you started to do this, and maybe what are your purposes in profession?
When I was a kid, I started shooting photographs. When I was 6 years old, I started shooting photographs.
6 years.
6 years. And then when I was 8, I started shooting video. My family didn't have much money, but it was always a priority, that there was a nice piano in the house, that we had paints and canvases. In my case, that I had a camera and eventually a video camera. My brother had all the music equipment he needed to become a professional musician, which he is now. So the arts were really highly valued in our house, and our artistic skills were nurtured by my parents. And I did need to make money as a kid. So when I was about 10, I started shooting weddings. By the time I was 12, I had a little office and a little video production company, because no one else in our village had a video camera. And so I was making pretty good money by the time I was 13. And when I was 18, I had saved enough to be able to move to New York and to start my career as a cinematographer and director there. Mm-hmm. And this was the very beginning of the internet. This was 1999. And in the 90s, New York was still great. It was super cheap. So there were lots of artists there. And my good friend who at the time, actually, he was my weed dealer, resume weed dealer. He sold me weed. Yeah. And, he's like, hey, he said, you know how to use a video camera, right? And I was like, yeah. And he said, my friend has this crazy idea to put video on the internet. And he raised money to do it. He has like investment to do it. I was like, wow, that's crazy. Video on the internet. I thought it was just for like email and stuff. So a year later, we were making content for Warner Brothers online. And I made a lot of TV commercials back in America. It was great. It was a great way to make money. There was a nice lifestyle associated with that. It allowed me to have a place in Los Angeles and a place in New York. And I would usually go back and forth once a week. It was a nice life. Mm-hmm. And then, I think when I turned 40, maybe like my late 30s, that became a little bit empty, that mm-hmm. existence. And I moved into doing independent films. There's no money in independent films, but, it was much more satisfying. And then in 2018, I left New York and I moved to Birma. Mm-hmm. And I shot in Birma and Thailand, for a couple of years. And then there was a coup in Burma. The democratically elected government was overthrown. And I got together with some Burmese filmmakers in New York and we started making this comedy series. We found a guy who looked a lot like the dictator. Mm-hmm. And, we wrote this like spoof comedy series about the dictator mm-hmm. in Burmese language.
Well, what I wanted to ask, what language do they speak?
Burmese.
Burmese. How
Yeah.
we use translators? Or?
No, Burma was a British colony for a long time. So everybody speaks, almost everyone speaks English. Like even the taxi drivers, everyone speaks English.
I see.
Super easy to function there.
And because in Ukraine it is more difficult.
Yeah.
For foreigner yeah. to find with whom to solve any question, having no knowledge in Russian or Ukrainian language, right?
Yes, it's difficult.
Oh yeah, what were your problems with this? How did you find the way out from the difficult situations?
In the 90s, when I first moved to Brooklyn, I lived in a bad neighborhood. It was a super dangerous neighborhood. And all my neighbors were from different countries. I was the only white guy for like at least a kilometer in any direction. They all spoke a myriad of different languages. And these people became my friends. And many of them spoke very little English. So we would hang out and party and, and I just became accustomed to hanging out with people with whom I could not communicate verbally. And so coming here to Ukraine was just a sort of natural extension of that background. I've never relied too heavily on verbal communication. When I first got to the front line, I had a translator for a day, and then I realized that he was really impacting the vibe of the situation. And so on the third day, I guess I told him he could go back to Kyiv, that I didn't need him anymore. And almost no one in that rota spoke English. But somehow it just wasn't a problem, I learned like 2 or 3 words in Ukrainian. I understood, pishli. And it just worked out. So, the language barrier has never been a huge issue for me.